Okay, what's up? Welcome back. I'm Brianka J. Thank you for joining my little corner of the internet where we talk all things books, all things literature, and this month, all things black, because we are celebrating 28 days of Black history. And so for today, I want to talk to you a little bit about the stereotypes that tend to perpetuate our society. And if you ever asked yourself, why do they think that black people are so violent, or why do they assume that black people can't swim, or that we don't like reading, or that we all love watermelon, or we all need chicken? If you ever ask yourself these questions, this series is for you, because we're going to dig back into the history of all this and bring it to the forefront so we can understand where these stereotypes actually originated, and even if they have any truth or evidence to them. So if you would like that and you want to hear more about that, go ahead, smash that subscribe button and like, comment, all of that is good for the algorithm. Let's get into this idea of the black savage. So we're looking at Miss Laura Green's paper that she wrote in the Ferris State University, as I referenced. And she starts off saying, the savage, and she says the movies were and still are a powerful medium for the transmission of stereotypes. Early silent movies such as The Wooing and the Wedding of a Coon in 1904, The Slave in 1905, the Sambo series 1909 to 1911, and The Nigger in 1915 offered existing stereotypes through a fascinating new medium. The premiere of A Birth of a Nation during the Reconstruction period in 1915 marked the change in emphasis from the happy Sambo and the pretentious inept Jim Crow stereotypes to that of the savage. In this D.W. Griffith film, the Ku Klux Klan tamed the terrifying savage African American through lynching. Following emancipation, the image of the threatening brute from the Dark Continent was revitalized. Acts of racial violence were justified and encouraged through the emphasis of this stereotype of the savage. The urgent message to whites was, we must put blacks back in their place or else. Old themes about African Americans began to well up in the face of the perceived threat. Beliefs that blacks were mentally inferior, physically and culturally unevolved, and ape-like in appearance were supported by prominent white figures like Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, and Thomas Jefferson. Theodore Roosevelt publicly stated that, as a race and in the mass, the Negroes are altogether inferior to whites. The ninth edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, published in 1884, stated authoritatively that the African race occupied the lowest position of the evolutionary scale, thus affording the best material for the comparative study of the highest anthropoids and the human species. This idea of African Americans as ape-like savages was exceptionally pervasive. For example, in 1906, the New York Zoological Park featured an exhibit with an African American man and a chimpanzee. Several years later, the Ringling Brothers Circus exhibited the Monkey Man. A black man was caged with a female chimpanzee that had been trained to wash clothes and hang them on a line. Scientific studies were conducted to establish the proper place of the African American in society. Scientists conducted tests and measurements and concluded that blacks were savages for the following reasons. A. The abnormal length of the arm. B. The weight of the brain. 35 ounces, gorilla 20 ounces, average European 45 ounces. C. The short, flat sub-nose. D. Thick, protruding lips. E. Exceedingly thick cranium. F. Short, black hair, eccentrically elliptical or almost flat in sections, and distinctly woolly. And G. Thick epidermis. In addition to these presumed anatomical differences, African Americans were thought to be far less sensitive to pain than whites. For example, black women were thought to experience less pain with childbirth and bear cutting with nearly as much impunity as dogs and rabbits. These stereotypes in the animal-like savage were used to rationalize the harsh treatment of slaves during slavery, as well as the murder, torture, and oppression of African Americans following emancipation. However, it can be argued that this stereotype still exists today. There were 4 stereotypes for female African Americans: the mammy, Unjamama, Sapphire, and Jezebel. The most enduring of these is the mammy. Although this stereotype originated in the South, it eventually permeated every region. As with the Sambo, the mammy stereotype arose as a justification of slavery. Before we get into the mammy, which will be another video, let's discuss how the savage continues to be so pervasive today. And my first thought is, even with the whole George Floyd thing in 2018, because this man was a bigger black man, we saw a lot more aggression come towards him. And that's not only with him. We see it all the time, even with smaller people. Because they're black, they decide that we need more physical action to control the environment and setting. We require more demand, more command, more anger and harshness given to us, because either we can't understand, they think we either can't comprehend, or that we're going to go back to these barbaric, primitive, violent actions. And so that's why they have to be harsher in their verbal articulation of what they want us to do, and harsher in their use of physical violence in order to command control of the situation. And what ends up happening is that we see a distinction between how blacks and African Americans are treated in police stops, in hospitals, in school settings, versus our white peers, because there is this pervasive idea that we don't either have the mental we can't mentally conceptualize the necessity of what the question is asked of us, or we are going to become barbaric and primitive, and therefore we need to use physical force in order to continue to control these people. And it's unfortunate because it is something that even the most intellectual, sophisticated individual, or a person that's completely unaware of racial issues, such as Africans coming from the African continent, they don't even understand that this is something that's happening, but yet they become victim to it because it is something that has become weaved into the intricacies of our society, right? And so it is something that we continue to see in movies and in plays. You see the savage when you look at Bigger Thomas and Richard Wright's The Native Son. You see the savage when they talk about black people looting. You know, we were considered savages when the Katrina catastrophe happened. Yet on January 6th, when there was a storming of the Capitol, these people were considered patriots, right? So the nature of how we utilize words and how we frame these incidents kind of helps to perpetuate these ideas. And unfortunately, whether consciously or subconsciously, these ideas permeate the brain of our peers and allow them to interact with us much differently than they interact with our counterparts. And when we decide to speak up for ourselves or articulate ourselves, we are deemed with the angry black woman or the angry black man label, which goes back to that savage. She's barbaric. She doesn't know how to regulate her emotions. But reality is, it wouldn't be perceived that way if I wasn't black. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to know more, I'll be back with another video about the savage and the other stereotypes, the mammy, the Jezebel, all of those. We'll get into it. But yeah, see you soon.